Thank you so much, Marilyn. And now, joining Alexis for our next conversation, I'd like to welcome Leslie Alexandre, the President and CEO of Life Science Seattle, and John Wecker, the President and CEO of the Pacific Northwest Research Institute. So take it away.
Thank you. So before we start, I just want to check the room. How many people we have who are directly involved in life sciences? And how many people we have who are just like more directly involved in the city or non-life sciences? Okay, good. All right. Then I think this could be very valuable. So let's take the question from the audience that we got. What's the infrastructure that's necessary to sustain these companies once they grow out of the kind of medium stage?
No, I'm going to take the other end. You take the top end, I'm going to take the bottom end in a second.
We'll trade off.
Okay.
So when you say once they've graduated, what do you really mean by that?
Well, I was just working off the question from the audience where they said, well, let's say once they were acquired, once they
So
grew
maybe we
beyond,
should back up and talk about the innovation economy that's here. Because I would say we have an incredible, massive amount of innovation that is taking place here. Which doesn't negate the issue that was raised earlier about what happens when these companies, the reason we have innovation, we have innovation because we have great discovery. And we have the ability to translate that discovery into something that is often life-saving for patients, but at least life-improving. And that's when you get the innovation, right? A lot of times people confuse discovery and innovation. We can get things through the FDA. We have an amazing track record of taking things out of institutes, just like John's, and moving them forward, finding partners, even getting that early stage seed capital and help they need. What we've got to focus on is how do we help them mature and have the right infrastructure to stay here and grow. That means they've got to have access to higher amounts of capital than when they're seed stage. They absolutely need space to grow into. Not just early incubator stage space, and they need collaborators and partners, and we need the infrastructure is all of us. It's the state government, it's local government, and we need to be willing to invest in that, say that's a priority area, and most of all, we got to have the workers. So we've got those PhDs, we've got great talent here. What we have learned is we also have incredible K-12 students who, once they're exposed to opportunities in science, which we talked about, and I'll give this to you in a minute, we talked about the dwarfing, the concern we have that what happens when the life science companies are outshined and out everything by the big tech companies. Well, one of the things that's happened in K-12 STEM here, we have a big commitment to that education. But over the years, it's the big anchor companies, the behemoth companies that have spent the most to invest. And so what do those kids get exposed to? They're getting engineering, they're getting technology, and they're getting math. We say, who took the science out of STEM? So our job is to expose kids early to the incredible opportunities to work in the industry and realize many of them do not need to have a PhD or even a 4-year degree to come into entry-level positions in life sciences.
My answer to that one is always just like, do you want to help? Do you want to make people click on ads, or do you want to save people's lives? Like, it seems like actually a pretty easy recruiting pitch. Sorry, go ahead, John.
No, I'm going to pick up on the last question because, very often we hear this, oh, woe is us. Amgen has left. Oh, woe is us. Bristol-Myers Squibb has left. There's no big anchors, and this is terrible. We're not going anywhere. I would turn it around and say, let's then embrace that. That is our unique advantage, is that we've got this turn where we grow to a certain level. Yes, the world of life sciences right now is about mergers and acquisitions. Embrace it. That's just the way it goes. But when those companies do leave, they leave behind a population of highly entrepreneurial people who are committed to staying in this area, who have great ideas. Usually through their exits, they have a little bit of means to take some risk and to move on. So let's embrace that and make that part of what makes Seattle really distinctive and unique in the national ecosystem, a place where this incredible discovery engine we have here starts to turning into early research in early development to a level where, yes, they're purchased, but they're purchased and then there's a reseeding, right? That evergreening of the ecosystem. And I think if we embrace that, and I would agree with the comment from the audience that part of that embrace needs some grease from our state and local government officials and some help, because there are real challenges, as we all know, in this industry, right? We're intensely capital intensive right from day one. Product development life cycles can go 2-3 decades, right? So that's not like a tech startup. There are a few stories of, Bristol-Myers squib companies starting in their mother's basement, right? That doesn't happen, right? So you have to have access to the lab space and the support in a very capital-intensive early period. And just as a quick comment, if I was to anticipate, Alexis, your next question, which is, well, what do you really need here? I think the thing we're really missing, we need more of, is incubator space for the very small startups. Those 1 or 2 really, fascinated, passionate entrepreneurs who have an idea. And in my facility, we rent out about 25% of our space to these small companies. And I'll rent out 100 lineal foot of bench space for one incredibly passionate, committed, intelligent entrepreneur just to do his or her thing. And then one day, hopefully, they will graduate into the facilities that are being built by the Alexandres and the Biomed when they've hit their Series A, and that's great, and we wish them all the best, and we'll get that evergreening effect in time. But what we're really missing is what happens to those 2 or 3 or 4 people just starting out with, scraping together the funds to do that very early research. And that's, I think, where the government, both at the local and state level, can play a critical role in helping support those early flames.
It is funny to hear people complaining about exits. As someone who mostly covers tech, people are desperate for them most of the time. Yeah. It's interesting. I've heard in the past that the state here has been inconsistent with its incentives for R&D, and because I'm an unwise moderator, I'm going to ask a very unpopular question in this room, which is, why should Washington subsidize this industry given the other priorities that the state has?
So I think when you say incentives, we need to realize a lot of times people hear that word and they think, wow, we're just going to buy those companies in. We're going to recruit them in. We're going to pay lots of money. We're going to anchor them in, as opposed to realizing we're one of like 3 states in the country that does not have an R&D tax credit. So what John said about the cost of doing business when these little companies, especially biotech, I would like to note we have an incredibly robust med device industry as well, with a completely different picture and profile. When they're acquired, most of the times the acquirers stay, and we have really massive companies up in Bothell. But on these little biotechs, in our state, we are doing almost nothing to help them, not R&D tax credit. We live in a state where the Constitution, makes me sad to say this, but really says you can't even give grants. Unless you have a special legislative authority, you cannot set up and take state money and give seed amounts of funding to a private sector entity. If you look at every other leading ecosystem in the country, not even talking about Massachusetts, where they put in $1 billion over 10 years, California, the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, $3 billion. Yeah. We're doing nothing. And those companies need that help. And we're creating amazing. We could spend an hour just talking about the household name products and devices and procedures that have been innovated here and discovered, but we're not getting the long-term benefits of that because those companies do leave.
I think, Alexis, if you look at the just the economics, if you look at the downturn that occurred back in 2007, 2008, the economy tanked, and that the one industry in which jobs continued to grow through that difficult period was in life science. Life sciences will survive the ups and downs of the economy. It's not sensitive to a lot of the factors of others. So there's economic incentive arguments to be made that this, as an industry, is just good for the region, the stability and the health of the region. And then for me, it goes on to a question of sort of values, right, in terms of what life science contributes both to the people in the state of Washington, nationally and globally. And we talked earlier about the Gates Foundation and some of the other really value-based organizations. Why not be a part of that, especially when we have so much already existing here to capitalize on? So we're not talking about starting something from fresh. We're talking about giving something, reaching that tipping point to make sure that ecosystem continues to, grow and grow in a positive way year after year. So I think there's a lot of good economic and value-based ideas that just argue for
a little investment.
A little
And what
investment.
happens is a whole lot of jobs. And those jobs they're clean, they're safe, they're high paying, and they're not just high paying for the executives and the people who commercialize, the business leaders or the PhDs. If you go into an entry-level biomanufacturing position where literally you might have your high school diploma and a certificate on top of that, or a 1 or 2 year degree, companies are paying $45,000 to $50,000 upon entry, and if you stay 5 years and progress up, those jobs are paying $80,000 and $90,000 a year. There are a lot of people who could benefit from those jobs, particularly when we reach out to underserved populations and pull them in.
If you look, you got Boston, Manhattan, Bay Area, I mean, over and over again, places that we like to think ourselves at least kind of similar to, they're all investing because they see the benefits from having a strong life science ecosystem.
When I was reading up on the local ecosystem here, one of the things that I saw was that the average venture round seemed to be like substantially smaller here than in Boston and San Francisco. Which was kind of, I just wanted to like fact check that because it seemed odd that it seemed like it was like half even of what it was happening in Boston and San Francisco. Why would that be? And I assume the other thing you'd like to answer is how do you change that?
I would say there's a lot more competition over fewer deals. In the Bay Area, we've got a lot of deals here. We don't have a lot of local venture capital firms. We have some great ones who've had wonderful success and exits, but they're largely located now in the Bay Area. It's interesting to watch Sana, which is exactly case in point of the talent, as we've talked about, the evergreen effect, is being called the next unicorn and is raising a huge amount of money right now. And we're super excited, hiring like crazy. But that is the exception. You're right. Those deals, and we say, shouldn't that make us more attractive as a place to invest?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's a numbers game. I think it's just the sheer number of deals is smaller, or the number of opportunities are small. And the analogy I often use when people say, well, we need more capital. We need more capital here. Yes, we need capital, but if you're going to invite venture capitalists and others to come up to Seattle to see what's here, as my analogy is, to come fish in our pond, well, the reality is there's not that many fish yet. And so they come, they cast their rod, and they just don't get a lot of bites. And so their willingness to come back, well, there's not a lot going on there. And that I think we really have to overcome, which is going to bring me full circle to this idea that where we really need the engine to start is at the very lowest level, at that very seed level, and help grow that to the point where it can graduate into something more self-sustainable. Because if we can't kind of charge that engine from the bottom, we're going to continue to have a pond that's just not full of enough fish.
So I think I want to direct this question to you, and I want to talk about the relationship that the industry has with the educational institutions, because I know you worked in North Carolina. Obviously, there's some great research universities there. How would you compare those relationships, there in Carolina with the big research universities and here with University of Washington?
It's an interesting comparison because there are so many more universities in North Carolina than there are here. In some ways, I think our ecosystem is more like the San Diego ecosystem, especially in greater Seattle, where you've got the powerhouse University of Washington bringing in massive amount of public and private research dollars, but a huge amount from NIH. And then you're surrounded, just like in Torrey Pines, where you have all those great research institutions. We've got the Hutch, we have PNRI, we've got the Allen Institute, we've got PATH, we've got literally dozens and dozens of world-class research institutes turning out the talent. In terms of the relationships there, I think generally the relationships are positive. I don't think it's as organized an ecosystem as North Carolina, but North Carolina had a plan. And they started back in 1984, 35 years ago, and they started with ag. They had a core focus in ag and said, biotech's important. We don't really know what it is, but we ought to invest and start a biotech center. And by gosh, they stayed focused, and then they built that into the biomanufacturing space. And they have an organized plan. I don't think we're as organized in our planning.
Yeah.
How would
Agreed.
you talk about the relationships of you're a research institute, and in terms of industry?
Growing. We're very, very basic. So for us, it's not our primary targets. But just in terms of relationships, the one thing I will, and this may seem a little unpatriotic here, especially in Seattle, I think the UW needs a little bit of competition. If you think about Boston with over 60 institutes of higher learning, and you think about just the intrinsic competitiveness of the MITs and the Harvards and the Boston Universities and on, all sort of vying for who's got the next big deal.
100% agree.
Yeah, and so we've got, as Leslie, you're absolutely right in terms of the number of federal funds that come to the University of Washington for research, top, always at the top, but somehow we're not churning out, from my perspective, we're not churning out the kind of new ventures.
We know
flow.
that.
Yes.
Private sector dollars on top of the public sector, we're not getting the leverage. And I do want to say that is the big thing for North Carolina. Oh my gosh. Never mind 16 campuses of the UNC system. If you just take that RTP and say you've got Duke, your big private mega university, you've got UNC Chapel Hill, and you've got the land grant institution. Ours is wonderful, but it's in the other side of the state, in Pullman, with Washington State. But they've got NC State, and they both compete and they collaborate. But there are 3 NCI-designated comprehensive cancer centers there. They have Wake Forest, they've got Davidson. So and they've got 59 community and technical colleges. So there is that healthy competition and the collaboration, but also the joining together, that sort of culture in North Carolina that says we're better together and we can fight it all out. But at the end of the day, if North Carolina needs us to come together, and necessity is the mother of all invention. So we haven't had that massive pressure for jobs here that they had when tobacco, furniture, and textiles went away.
All right, Amazon Prime University, here we come, here in Seattle. We have a little bit of time for some questions, maybe two questions. There's a mic coming your way. I think she's going all the way around.
Thank you. Chris Goddard, Public-Private Partnership Manager for the City of Bellevue. I have a question for you. Do you feel like we have a marketing problem for the industry? It sounds like from Marilyn's comments and others that it's sort of the message is muted, and we see other cities like New York who are screaming from the rooftops right now that we're a tech center. I worked for New York previously, so I know that we're screaming from the rooftops that we are an innovation hub. So is that the problem, and what do you think public sector should be doing about that?
So I'm going to set the frame and I'll let you answer because you've been working on this. So having lived in Seattle for almost 20 years now, my perception of the state was, we have everything. Don't tell anybody. They might come here. And so I think that attitude still very much prevails. So with that frame, I think, Leslie, you've got some great initiatives to really raise our voice.
We really have made this a huge priority. There's no question about it that people don't know, particularly the further out you get. But even with our own state, that being muted by those big tech companies and others, in some ways we've lost our way a little bit. And Life Science Washington, working with its members, has said, first, we're going to build visibility again within the state to make sure that our elected officials, our business leaders recognize all the incredible things that are happening in this industry, and we have a seat at the table helping plan for the future. But we are also working on a major public relations effort and a campaign we're really focusing on helping to recruit in some of the specialized talent from out of state that because those companies have gotten acquired over the years, we're lacking some of the key commercialization slots. To me, the great thing is, I think right now there are about a dozen companies that have matured and reached the stage where they are commercializing and they're doing it here. So it's very high priority, need all the partners and help we can get. And yes, nobody knows, but we're working on it. So come join us and help get the message out.
Oh, thank you so much for your time. Thank you. Stick around. I think Emily's going to come back up, but first, thank our panelists.
Thank you.